The stone of Fortress Greymark always held the cold, long after the fires had died. I knew that it was cold. I'd breathed it for 2 years. It was the cold of silence, cold of being unseen. And that invisibility, it was the only reason I was still alive. My name is Ilara, and in this world of fang and fury, of alphas who ruled with iron and instinct, an unmated omega like me was just one step above prey. I'd learned the rules from my mother before the fever took her. Move like a shadow, smell like the wind. I crushed dried lavender and sage into my skin until my own scent was a ghost and never, ever meet an alpha's gaze, especially not his. Alpha King Kalen was a storm given flesh, taller and broader than any other, with eyes the color of a winter sky just before the snow falls, a pale, piercing gray that saw everything. I'd watched him from the darkened archways of the Great Hall, a statue of lethal grace. I'd scrubbed the courtyard stones after his challenge fights, the water in my bucket swirling pink long after the bodies were dragged away. He was justice and vengeance wrapped in black leather and dark fur. To be noticed by him was a death sentence, or a fate I feared even more. So I became a ghost, a useful one. I tended the hearth fires before dawn, the embers my only companions. I carried linens, scrubbed pots, and polished silver until my reflection blurred in its surface. I existed in the spaces between, a silent, scentless drudge. For 2 years, it worked. I was wrong to think it could last. The trouble found me in the lower halls, where the torchlight fought a losing battle against the encroaching dark. I was carrying a stack of freshly folded blankets, my mind already in my narrow cot in the servants' wing. The scent hit me first, spiced anger and raw aggression, the signature of Border Patrol alphas. Not my problem. I pressed myself against the rough stone wall, becoming part of the pattern, holding my breath. 3 of them blocked the corridor ahead. I recognized them. Torin's men. Torin, the alpha of the Western Reach, who watched Kalen with a smile that never reached his eyes. These 3 shared that same hollow amusement. The tallest one, Garen, stepped forward, his boots echoing. Well, look what the shadows coughed up. I kept my eyes down, on his boots. I'm just passing through, sir, to the guest quarters. A little late for deliveries, isn't it? Another mused, spinning a dagger. The light caught the edge, silver. My blood ran colder than the stone. Please, I whispered, the word tasting like dust. The steward expects nothing, Garen interrupted, his voice dropping to a predatory purr. He's busy. Everyone is busy tonight. The third, Lev, simply smiled. It was the worst of all. We have a message for your beloved king. Then they were on me. The first blow was a fist to my stomach, driving the air from my lungs in a silent, painful rush. The blankets scattered like fallen leaves. A hand fisted in my hair, wrenching my head back. I didn't scream. Screaming was an invitation. I took the second blow, a crack across my cheekbone that painted stars behind my eyelids. A boot connected my ribs, once, twice. The sounds was a sickening, wet crunch inside me. They weren't trying to claim me. This was something else. Pure, brutal punctuation. This is for Kalen, hissed Finn, his breath hot and sour at my ear as I crumpled. A little reminder, his territory isn't as secure as he thinks. Even his ghosts can bleed. They left me there, a broken pile on the cold stone. The pain was a universe expanding from my core. Each breath was a knife twisting between my ribs. Copper filled my mouth. The torchlight above swum, blurring into a single dying sun. As darkness nibbled at the edges of my vision, one thought, clear and terrible, rose above the agony. They knew. They knew I was an omega. The lavender hadn't hidden me. It had just made me a quieter target. The last thing I heard was the distant, echoing laughter from the hall above, a world away, and I knew with a certainty that was worse than the pain that this was just the beginning. By morning, half the pack was dead. I awoke to softness and pain. The pain was immediate, a throbbing, fiery map of the damage. The softness was a mystery. My fingers clenched, not on rough wool, but on linen so fine it felt like cloud. The air smelled of pine, smoke, and a deeper, wilder scent, ozone and frost. Alpha, not just any alpha. My eyes flew open. I was in a vast bed under heavy furs, in a room made of stone and shadow. Tapestries depicting great hunts and older wars hung on the walls. A fire crackled in a hearth big enough to stand in. This was not the infirmary. This was Ilara. The voice was low, calm, and it held the weight of the mountains themselves. I knew it. Every soul in Greymark knew it. Alpha King Kalen sat in a high-backed chair beside the bed. He wasn't in his armor, just a simple dark tunic and trousers, but he seemed to fill the space, making the grand room feel small. His gray eyes were on me, studying me with an intensity that made my bruised skin prickle. In his gaze, I saw no pity. I saw a banked fire. I saw a calculation so sharp it could cut stone. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. His hands were clasped, the knuckles white. He was holding himself still with immense force. "You are in my chambers," he said, answering my unspoken question. His voice was carefully even. "You have 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, and more bruises than my healer cared to count." I tried to sit up. The movement unleashed a torrent of white-hot agony in my side. A whimper escaped me before I could lock it away. His hand moved, a blur of motion, to press gently but firmly on my shoulder, holding me down. "Do not," he commanded, and the power in that quiet order settled into my bones. Terror and shame warred within me. Lying in the Alpha King's bed, being tended by him, it was a visibility so profound it felt like a death sentence. I am sorry, my king, for the trouble. I will go. I can still work." "No." The word was final, absolute. It echoed off the stone. He removed his hand from my shoulder, but the impression of its heat remained. He watched me, his expression unreadable. "You were attacked in my fortress, on my stone. You were left as a message, from me." It wasn't a question. He knew. I looked away, focusing on a seam in the fur coverlet. It was dark. I didn't see them clearly. "Try again." I flinched. The command was gentle, but it was a command nonetheless. It brooked no disobedience. "Ilara," he said, and my name in his mouth was a strange, soft shock. "Do not lie to me. Who hurt you?" The room shrank. The fire's crackle was the only sound. I thought of Torrens' smug face in court, of his men's laughter, of the silver dagger. If I spoke, I would light a fuse on a powder keg. If I stayed silent, they would come back. They knew my secret now. I was a ghost no longer. The truth felt like shards of glass in my throat. I forced them out. "Garen, Finn, Lev, Torrens' men." A stillness descended upon Kalen so complete, it was more frightening than any outburst. The air grew heavier, charged with a silent, deadly storm. He gave a single, slow nod. "I see." He stood, and the room seemed to reorient itself around his height. "You will remain here. You will not leave this room, for any reason. Is that understood?" It was an order that vibrated in the air. My Omega instinct, the part I had suppressed for so long, trembled and wanted to bare its throat in submission. I fought it. For how long? "Until I say otherwise." He moved toward the door, a shadow against the firelight. He didn't look back. "Rest, Ilara. This is not your burden to carry anymore." He left, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. The silence he left behind was deafening. but it was a different silence. It wasn't the silence of being overlooked. It was the silence of being seen, claimed, and placed squarely in the eye of the coming storm. I was under the protection of the Alpha King, and I had just handed him the names of the men he would kill. The dawn after Kalen's question arrived not with light, but with a sense of dread that seeped through the fortress like a fog. I felt it even from within the stone-walled sanctuary of his chambers. The usual morning clamor, the clang of the forge, the shouts from the training yard, the bustle of servants was muted, replaced by a tense, waiting quiet. I had managed to shuffle to the narrow window, each step a negotiation with the fire in my side. The courtyard below was washed in weak gray light. Warriors stood in a grim, loose circle. In the center, 2 figures knelt, hands bound. My breath caught. Finn and Lev. Garen was notably absent. Kalen stood before them, dressed not in finery, but in practical fighting leathers. No crown. He needed none. His authority was a physical presence, even from this distance. My heart hammered against my injured ribs, a painful, frantic drum. I saw Rylan, Kalen's beta, speak to him. Kalen's head turned slightly, listening. Then he looked at the prisoners. One of them, Lev, lifted his head, his mouth moving in frantic, pleading shapes, begging. Kalen moved. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution, efficient, brutal, and utterly without malice. It was simply consequence. One moment, Lev was kneeling. The next, he was a lifeless heap on the cobblestones. Finn tried to scramble away, a crabbed, hopeless movement. Kalen ended it with a swift, clean stroke. The courtyard was silent. No cheers, no cries, just the acceptance of a lesson written in blood. A strange, unsettling feeling uncoiled in my chest. It wasn't horror. It was a relief. A dark, deep, guilty relief. The hands that had broken me would never touch anyone else. A low, almost inaudible sound vibrated in my throat. My Omega's quiet, instinctive approval. I clapped my hands over my mouth, shocked at myself. The door opens behind me. I didn't need to turn. His scent, pine, frost, and now the faint, cold tang of iron, filled the room. "You watched," Kalen said. His voice was flat, weary. I kept my face toward the window, my back to him. "You wanted me to understand. Do you?" I finally turned. He looked older in the morning light, lines of fatigue etched beside his eyes. There was a new, shallow cut on his jaw. He had not come away unscathed. "I understand that they're dead. I understand that you started a war because of a servant." "I finished a war that Torin began when he sent his dogs into my home," he corrected, walking to the hearth. He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and began to wash the blood from his hands. The action was methodical, ordinary. "And you are not just a servant." What am I, then? The question was out before I could stop it, laced with a bitterness I didn't know I still carried. He dried his hands, turning to face me. His gray eyes were endlessly deep. "You are under my roof. You were harmed under my protection, so your safety is my responsibility. Your pain—" He paused, as if searching for the right word. "Your pain is now my concern." "Why?" I whispered, the word barely audible. "Why does it matter? Omegas are hurt every day." His jaw tightened. "Not in my hall, not as a challenge to my rule, and never again will one be harmed for the crime of simply existing here." He approached, stopping a few feet away. The space between us hummed with an unspoken energy.
"Torin thinks this makes you a weakness. He is a fool. A king who does not protect the most vulnerable in his pack is no king at all. He is a tyrant, and his pack will rot from within." He was rewriting the rules before my eyes. The world I had survived in, a world where invisibility was safety, was crumbling. "Garen escaped," Kalen stated, watching my reaction. A new chill, sharper than before, shot through me. The leader, the one with the coldest eyes. "Garen fled to Torin. He will have told him everything." Kalen's gaze was unwavering. They know what you are, Alara. They know I intervened. You are a target now. Not because you are weak, because you are the point of the spear I will aim at Torin's heart. The truth of it settled into my bones, colder than the stone floor. My invisibility was gone, burned away in the bloody dawn. I was seen, by my king and by his enemies. Kalen must have seen the fear in my eyes. His expression softened, a minuscule shift. You are also under the protection of my vow and my wolf. He said the last part quietly, as if it were a secret. He is unsettled when you are in pain. The admission hung in the air. It was the first acknowledgement of the strange magnetic pull I'd felt since I woke in his room. The bond. It was there, a fragile new thread connecting my core to his. It was terrifying. It was the only thing that felt solid in the shifting world. What happens now? I asked. Now, Kalen said, his voice regaining its edge of steel, Torin will make his move. He will call me unstable, a king ruled by sentiment. He will challenge, or he will incite others to challenge. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not just a king, but a strategist. You will remain here, where you are safest. You will heal, and you will learn. Learn what? How to be more than a ghost, he said simply. How to be the reason the shadows themselves now fear this fortress. He left then, the weight of his words lingering long after the door had closed. I was a pawn, a symbol, a target, but for the first time, I was also something else. I was a responsibility he had chosen, and in the strange, silent language of the bond that hummed between us, I felt the terrifying, undeniable truth. My wolf, so long suppressed, had chosen him back. The silence of Kalen's chambers became a living thing. It was not an empty silence, but a thick, listening quiet, punctuated by the crackle of the fire and the distant, muffled sounds of a fortress holding its breath. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage, my body healing, but my mind running frantic laps against the walls of my new reality. Rylan, the beta, became my keeper and my sole source of news. He was a man of few words, with watchful eyes that missed nothing. He brought meals, herbs that tasted of bitter earth, and updates delivered in a dry, factual tone. Torin has called a gathering of the border alphas. He speaks of instability, of a king distracted by a wounded bird. I flinched at the description. A wounded bird, helpless, fragile. And the pack? What do they say? Ryland's gaze was impartial. Some are wary. Change frightens wolves as much as men. Others, remember when they or theirs were vulnerable. They listen. He paused, his eyes sharpening. Your presence in this tower is a question mark, Alara. Some see a hostage, some see a favorite. You must decide what you are, because they will write the story for you if you do not. His words haunted me long after he left. Decide what I was. For 2 years I had been nothing, a pair of hands, a shadow. Now I was a focal point, a symbol in a political game I didn't understand. But Rylan was wrong. I wasn't a hostage. The door wasn't locked. Kalen's command and my own survival instinct were the only bolts. That night, the bond itched under my skin. It was a strange sensation, like a thread being plucked deep in my chest. A wave of restless agitation, not my own, washed through me. Kalen, he was nearby, and he was troubled, angry. Driven by a pull I couldn't name, I crept to the chamber door and eased it open. The corridor outside was dark, lit by a single guttering torch. The agitation grew sharper, leading me like a scent. I moved silently, the ghost I used to be serving me now, toward the sound of low, tense voices coming from a small council room a few doors down. The door was ajar. I saw Kalen standing before a map carved into a great wooden table, his shoulders rigid. Rylan was with him, along with an older warrior I recognized as Bren, the captain of the guard. "Not just talk, Kalen," Bren was saying, his voice gravelly with worry. "Scouts report movement. Torin is rallying them. He's using the executions as proof of your brutality." They were justice. Kalen's voice was a low growl. "Aye, but he's spinning it as madness, a king who kills his own for a servant." Bren's eyes flickered, and I knew he was choosing his words carefully. The story is taking root. Some of our own are listening. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Dissent. Within Greymark itself. Who? Kalen's question was deadly quiet. Bren hesitated. "It's whispers, shadows. No one steps into the light, but supplies have gone missing from the armory. A messenger was found dead on the southern trail, his pouch empty. It's not just Torin outside our walls. There are rats within." A traitor. The word hung in the air, more poisonous than Torin's threats. An enemy you could see was one thing. An enemy sleeping in your hall, eating at your table, that was a rot that could collapse a mountain. Kalen's fist came down on the table, not with a bang, but with a solid, ominous thud. The map trembled. "Find them." The command was absolute, freezing the very air in the room. "I want names. I want proof. Anyone who whispers against the safety of this pack betrays not just me, but every soul under this roof, including the ones they deem weak." His gaze lifted then, as if drawn by an invisible string, and found mine in the crack of the door. His gray eyes blazed, not with anger at my presence, but with a fierce, protective fury that stole my breath. He had known I was there. Perhaps the bond had told him. I didn't wait to be dismissed. I fled back to the chamber, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. The world was not just dangerous, it was intricately, treacherously layered. An external enemy, a hidden internal threat, and me at the center, the catalyst for it all. Later, long after the fortress had settled into an uneasy sleep, the door opened. Kalen entered, the weight of the night heavy on him. He didn't speak. He went to the hearth, staring into the flames. "You heard," he finally said. Not a question. "Yes." "I will not apologize for the truth," he said, his voice rough with truth. "You deserve to know the cliff's edge we are standing on." "I'm making you vulnerable." The words were ash in my mouth. He turned from the fire. "You are revealing who was already vulnerable. A pack with a sickness in its heart will fall, with or without an external push. You," he took a step toward the bed, "you are the fever that makes the sickness visible. It is painful, it is dangerous, but it is the only path to healing." He stood looking down at me, and in the firelight, he didn't look like an untouchable king. He looked like a man carrying a mountain on his shoulders. The bond between us hummed, a conduit for his exhaustion and his unshakable resolve. What can I do? The whisper left my lips before I could cage it. Something shifted in his eyes, a slight softening. "Heal. And when you are strong, learn. Learn the maps, learn the lineages, learn the way a pack breathes so you can hear when its rhythm falters." He reached out, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. His fingers did not touch my skin. They hovered, a breath away from the worst of the bruises on my arm. A current of warmth, of pure alpha reassurance, flowed from him, not through touch, but through the bond itself. It was a calm, steady strength, seeping into my own frayed nerves. "The ghost is gone, Ilara. It is time for the wolf to awake and to choose its place in the pack." He left then, and the strange, comforting warmth lingered. His words were not a comfort, they were a challenge. The cliff's edge was real, the traitor was real, but I was not just a wounded bird to be used as bait or a symbol. He was offering me a blade, not of steel, but of knowledge, of belonging. And as I lay in the dark, listening to the whispers in the stone, I knew I would take it. I would learn, because the ghost had only ever known how to hide. The wolf, if I dared to let her rise, might just learn how to fight. Strength returned slowly, like sap rising in a frozen tree. Each day I could walk a little farther across the chamber. The fiery pain in my ribs dulled to a persistent ache. With Ryland's tacit approval, I began my strange education. He brought me scrolls, dry histories of the pack, tedious lineage charts, maps of the territory with faded ink marked. It was a world of parchment and dust, so different from the world of sweat and stone I knew. But I devoured it. I saw Greymark not as a collection of halls and walls, but as a living entity. I learned the names of the border families, the old treaties, the sources of water and game. I began to understand the fragile balance Kaelin held. One afternoon, as I traced a route on a map, a detail snagged my memory. Ryland, this southern pass, the one where the messenger was killed, it leads to the Silver Flow Caves, yes? He looked up, surprised. It does. Old mining tunnels, mostly collapsed. Why? A cold certainty dripped down my spine. The missing supplies from the armory? Were they tools? Pickaxes, rope, lantern oil? Ryland went very still. His watchful eyes turned sharp. They were. How did you know? I didn't know. I felt it. A connection clicking into place, guided by something deeper than logic. The bond, perhaps, humming with a new kind of intuition. They're not just hiding. They're digging. They're using the old tunnels, a secret way in or out. Ryland was on his feet in an instant. "Stay here," he ordered, and was gone, the door closing softly. The discovery thrummed inside me, a mix of fear and fierce satisfaction. I had been useful, not as a servant, but as a strategist. The feeling was intoxicating. That night, Kaelin entered, the scent of cold night air and damp earth clinging to him. His eyes found me immediately, alight with a grim triumph. "You were right." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. The confirmation was enough. "We found the tunnel entrance, concealed near the lower granary. They've been working for weeks. We set a watch. Tonight, we take them." "You're going yourself?" The question leapt out, charged with a worry that startled me. He stopped pacing, looking at me. "They are my pack to cleanse, my responsibility, and they hurt what is under my protection." He said it plainly, a fact of the world. The wolf demands it. The king must see it done. The bond surged between us, carrying his relentless drive, his cold fury. It should have frightened me. Instead, it made my own blood run hotter. This was not the blind rage of a brute. This was the focused wrath of a protector, and a part of me, the newly awakened wolf, understood it perfectly. "Be careful," I whispered, the words feeling impossibly intimate. A flicker of something warm crossed his austere features. He gave a single grave nod. Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows of his fortress. The wait was agony. The bond was a live wire, vibrating with tension. I felt bursts of adrenaline, spikes of focus, the cold clarity of the hunt. I sat by the window, staring into the moonless night, feeling like I was walking beside him in the dark, dank tunnels. Then a jolt, sharp, sudden, pain that was not mine, followed by a blazing, protective anger so intense it stole my breath. Kaelin. I was on my feet, my own pain forgotten. The bond was a storm, howling with conflict. I couldn't stay here. I moved to the door, my hand on the latch. His command warred with the primal scream of the bond. The bond won. I slipped into the corridor, a shadow once more. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I was following a beacon of fury and pain. The fortress was eerily quiet, the usual guards absent from their posts, drawn into the night's operation. I moved downward, into the older, colder levels near the storerooms. The smell hit me first. Blood, fresh and coppery. And then the sounds, a grunt of effort, a clash of metal, a snarl that was purely animal. I rounded a corner and froze. In a small, torch-lit alcove near the granary entrance, Kaelin fought, not against a stranger, but against Bren, the captain of the guard, the traitor. Bren fought with the desperate strength of a cornered wolf, his face a mask of grim betrayal. Kaelin moved with lethal grace, but a dark stain was spreading on his left side, where a dagger must have found its mark in the surprise of the ambush. Garen was there too, watching from the mouth of a ragged hole in the wall, the hidden tunnel. He held a torch, his face a grimace of malicious satisfaction. "Finish him, Bren. His precious Omega isn't here to distract him now." His words were meant to goad Kaelin, but they had the opposite effect. At the mention of me, Kaelin's eyes found mine across the space. In that split second of connection, I saw not fear for himself, but a terrifying, all-consuming fear for me. It broke his focus. Bren lunged, his sword aiming for Kaelin's heart. Time slowed. A scream lodged in my throat. But I was not the girl from the lower halls anymore. The wolf was awake. I didn't think. I moved. I didn't attack Garen. I didn't have a weapon. Instead, I ran straight for the unstable-looking stack of aged timber and mining props piled near the tunnel entrance. With a cry that was more snarl than shout, I threw my whole weight against it. With a groan of protesting wood and a cloud of ancient dust, the pile toppled, not on anyone, but directly across the mouth of the tunnel, between Garen and the fight. The crash was tremendous in the confined space. Garen leapt back with a curse, his escape route blocked by a tangled heap of debris. Kaelin, seizing the moment of distraction my action had created, disarmed Bren with a brutal twist of his wrist. The sword clattered away. In the next motion, Kaelin's own blade was at Bren's throat. "Yield," Kaelin commanded, his voice echoing with alpha power. Blood seeped from his wound, but he stood unwavering. Bren's eyes, wide with shock and the fading rush of betrayal, looked past Kaelin to me. He saw the Omega servant who had just changed the course of his fate. He sagged, all fight leaving him. I yield. Guards, led by Rylan, poured into the alcove then, seizing Bren and a snarling Garen. The fight was over. Kaelin didn't watch them be taken. He turned, his gaze finding me again. He strode toward me, ignoring the wound at his side. He stopped before me, his chest heaving. His eyes searched my face, my body, for injury. "You were told to stay." His voice was a rough scrape. "You were hurt." My reply was just as simple, just as true. For a long moment, we just looked at each other in the chaotic aftermath. The bond was a torrent between us, his fury at my danger, my fear for his injury, and underneath it all, a powerful, shocking surge of mutual respect, of partnership. He didn't thank me, he didn't chastise me further, he simply reached out, and this time his hand did touch me. His fingers, stained with his own blood, brushed a smudge of dust from my cheek. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a current through the bond so strong, it was almost a physical shock. The ghost is truly gone, and the wolf has fangs. He turned then, allowing Rylan to see to his wound, but the moment hung in the air. I had not just uncovered a traitor, I had stepped onto the battlefield, and I had chosen my side not from the shadows, but in the glaring light of truth. The cliff's edge was still there, but I was no longer standing at the brink. I was learning to fly. The fallout from Bren's betrayal was a quieter, deeper wound than the bloodshed in the courtyard. It was a poison that had to be purged from the mind, not just the body. Kaelin moved with a grim efficiency. There were no public executions this time. The trials were swift, held in the sealed council chamber. Bren, broken and resigned, named others, a quartermaster, 2 guards, a scribe, a small but deadly cancer within the heart of Greymark. They were exiled, not killed, stripped of their pack bonds and cast beyond the borders under the harshest of moon oaths. It was a mercy that felt like a colder cruelty. To be packless was a living death, but Kaelin said it was a message. We do not slaughter our own in panic. We cut out the rot to heal. I understood. He was rebuilding, not just destroying. My role shifted subtly. I was no longer confined to the royal chambers. With Rylan as my ever-present shadow, I began to move through the fortress again. But I was not the invisible maid. I was Alara, the Omega who had stood with the king in the dark, who had toppled a tunnel to block a traitor's escape. The glances that followed me were no longer just curious or contemptuous. They were measuring, wary, sometimes respectful. Kaelin's wound kept him from the training yards for a few days, and he often worked in his solar, a roam of books and maps adjacent to his chambers. He began to include me, not as a participant, but as a silent observer. The border alphas meet at the full moon, Rylan reported one evening, pointing to a spot on the large map table. Here, the stone circle. Torin will have his proof of your weakness, the exiled instead of the executed. He'll call it indecision. Kaelin studied the map, his fingers resting on the carved wood. Then we must give him different proof. He looked up, his gaze landing on me where I sat by the window mending a torn cloak. We will go to the gathering. Rylan stiffened. Sir, that is a provocation. They will see it as you flaunting the source of the tension. Precisely, Kaelin said with a sharp edge to his voice. They will see an Omega under the direct protection of her Alpha. They will see her not cowering, but present. They will see that I do not hide what I protect. I display it because I am strong enough to defend it. My needle stilled. He was talking about me as if I were a banner, a symbol. The old fear stirred, the fear of being a target. But a new feeling, thorny and defiant, rose alongside it. He was also talking about taking me to the heart of the enemy's council. He was trusting me not to break. It's a trap, I said quietly. Both men looked at me. You're the prize he wants. He'll try to force a challenge there, on his terms, surrounded by his allies. A faint, approving glint showed in Kaelin's eyes. Yes, he will try. And you'll give him one? Rylan asked, his voice tight.
I will give him a choice, Kaelin corrected. Stand down or stand against me. But the challenge will not be to first blood. It will be for the right to rule Greymark. A fight to submission or yield. He finally turned fully to me. You will be there. You will stand where all can see you. You will show them that the heart of Greymark is not a weakness, but the reason for its strength. The weight of his expectation was a physical thing. He wasn't asking if I wanted to go. He was telling me my part in the story. And the wolf inside me, the one he had awakened, lifted its head. It did not want to hide. It wanted to stand beside him and face the howling dark. The journey to the stone circle was a somber procession. We rode with a contingent of 50 warriors, Kaelin's most loyal. I traveled in a covered sled, but I kept the hide opened, refusing to be a secret. I saw the land change, from Greymark's tall pines to the wind-scoured moors where the ancient circle stood. The gathering was already thrumming with tension when we arrived. Hundreds of wolves from a dozen border packs were there, their scents a chaotic storm of aggression and anxiety. Torin's banner, a black wolf on a red field, flew prominently. As Kaelin's party entered the clearing, silence fell in a wave. Every eye was on him, and then, inevitably, on me as I stepped from the sled and stood back straight beside Rylan. A ripple of whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Torin stepped forward from a cluster of alphas. He was handsome in a cruel way, with oiled dark hair and a smile that didn't touch his cold blue eyes. Kaelin, you honor us with your presence, and you've brought a guest. How novel. She is under my protection, Torin, Kaelin said, his voice carrying easily, as all Omegas in my territory now are, a new law of Greymark. The murmuring grew louder. Torin's smile widened. A new law, for one pretty face. You slaughter my men, exile your own, and now you remake our oldest ways.
This is not strength, brother. This is the madness of a moon-touched wolf." "The only madness," Kalen said, stepping forward, "is believing strength comes from terrorizing the vulnerable. You sent men to beat a defenseless servant to send me a message. Here is my reply." He spread his arms, encompassing the circle, the packs. "I am here. My pack is strong. My laws are just. If you have a challenge, make it. Do not skulk in shadows and batter servants." The gauntlet was thrown. The air crackled. Torin's smile finally vanished. "You think I won't?" He stripped off his cloak. "I challenge you, Kalen of Greymark, for the rule of the territory, for the sanity of the pack you are leading to ruin with your softness." It was what we expected, but the reality of it in this sacred space surrounded by hostile faces sent a chill through my bones. The bond vibrated with Kalen's cold, clear focus. He removed his own outer tunic, handing it to Rylan. Their eyes met for a second, and Rylan gave a tight nod. The two alphas circled each other in the center of the stone circle. They were both massive, powerful, but Kalen moved with a fluid grace, his injury seemingly forgotten. Torin was heavier, more brutal. They clashed. It was not like the fight with Bren. This was primal, a raw contest of power and will. Blows landed like falling rocks, claws flashed, snarls ripped the air. I felt every impact through the bond, a shared flinch, a surge of adrenaline. I stood frozen, my hands clenched, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Torin fought dirty. He kicked dust, feinted low, and struck high. He was trying to enrage Kalen, to make him reckless. But Kalen was a glacier, patient and inevitable. He absorbed the blows, studied the patterns, and waited. Then Torin overextended. A wild, furious lunge. Kalen sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his momentum to slam him into one of the ancient standing stones. The impact echoed. Torin staggered, dazed. Kalen was on him in an instant, an arm locked around his throat from behind, applying pressure. "Yield," Kalen growled, his voice thick with alpha command. Torin thrashed, choking. His eyes, bulging, scanned the crowd of silent, watching alphas. He saw no help there. He saw only the consequence of his failure. His body went slack. "I yield," he gasped. Kalen released him immediately, stepping back. Torin collapsed to his knees, coughing. Kalen turned, breathing heavily, a trickle of blood from a cut on his brow. He looked not at the defeated Torin, but at the assembled alphas. His gray eyes were fierce, uncompromising. "The law stands. The protection stands. Greymark is strong. Are there any other challenges?" No one moved. No one spoke. The message was received. Kalen walked back to our group. His gaze found mine. In it, I saw the fading fire of battle, and beneath it, a question. "Did you see? This is what I am. This is what I do." And in that moment, I didn't see a brutal king or a strategic mind. I saw a man who had just fought a war on two fronts, one against an enemy and one against an outdated, cruel way of thinking, and had won. The bond swelled with a feeling so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. It was pride. Not just his, mine, for him. We had faced the howling dark together, and we had not been swallowed. As we prepared to leave the silent circle, a new sound echoed across the moors. Not a challenge cry, a long, mournful howl from the north. Then another from the east, distant but clear. Warning howls. Ryland's head snapped up. "That's not a border patrol. That's an alarm." Kalen's victorious stance shifted instantly to that of a hunter on alert. He looked from the northern horizon to the defeated Torin, still kneeling in the dust. A new, colder understanding dawned in his eyes. The challenge had been a distraction. The real threat was just beginning. The triumphant return to Greymark became a forced march. The ominous howls from the borders changed everything.
Kalen rode ahead with a cadre of scouts, leaving Rylan to bring the main party and me back with all speed. The air in the sled was thick with a new kind of tension, not of political games, but of impending storm. Rylan's face was grim. Scouts should have reported days ago. The silence, that's the worst sign. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above the rumble of the wheels.
The howls were from the high northern passes, the Winterfang clan. He spat the name like a curse. They are not like the border packs. They don't care for territory or politics. They are raiders, ice and death. They haven't stirred in a generation. Why now? Ryland's eyes met mine, bleak. Because someone told them Greymark was weak, divided, a rich fortress with a king distracted by internal strife. Tauren. The thought was a stone in my gut. His challenge wasn't just for power, it was a signal. He may have yielded, but he had already lit the beacon. We found Greymark in a state of controlled frenzy. The forges blazed day and night, the ringing of hammers a constant song. Stores were being inventoried, defenses checked. Kalen was everywhere, a whirlwind of orders and strategy. The Bond hummed with his relentless focus, a constant low-grade buzz of urgency that became the backdrop of my own thoughts. I could not and would not hide in the tower now. I went to Kalen in his solar, where he stood over the map, deep in conversation with his remaining captains. "I want to help." He looked up, fatigue etched around his eyes, but his gaze was sharp. "How?" "The wounded, the families, the preparations. I may not wield a sword, but I can organize, I can manage supplies, I can calm." It was true. My presence, the strange new status I held, had an effect. Omegas and younger warriors looked to me. I was a living symbol of Kalen's new law, of protection. I could be a steadying hand. He studied me for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "With Rylan, always. You see to the inner fortress, the heart. I will see to the walls." It was a division of labor, a trust deeper than any words. He was entrusting me with the spirit of the pack, while he defended its body. The next days were a blur. I worked with the healers, sorting herbs and preparing bandages. I helped move the very young and very old to the deepest, most secure caverns within the mountain. I walked the lines of nervous warriors, offering water, a steady look, a reminder that they fought for a home worth protecting. I saw the fear in their eyes, and I let them see the certainty in mine, a certainty I borrowed from the bond, from the unshakable pillar of will that was Kalen. One evening, as I oversaw the distribution of evening rations in the great hall, a young Omega girl, no more than 10, tugged on my sleeve. Her eyes were huge. "Lyda Lalara, will the ice wolves get us?" I knelt, bringing myself to her level. I could smell her fear, sweet and sharp. "What's your name?" "Lina." "Lina," I said, keeping my voice soft but firm. "The Alpha King is on the walls. Rylan is at the gates. Every warrior here is ready. And you know what they're fighting for?" She shook her head. "For this hall, for your bed, for your tomorrow. They are very, very good at their jobs. Our job is to be brave here, to keep the home fires burning for them. Can you do that?" She searched my face, then nodded, a little braver. "I can tend the hearth in the lower hall. I'm good at it." "Perfect," I said, smiling. "That is a very important job." As she scampered off, I felt Ryland's presence behind me. "You have a way with them," he remarked quietly. "They just need to know they're part of the pack too, not just cargo to be protected." He gave a rare, slight smile. "He was right, you know. You are the heart." A horn blast tore through the night, 3 short, 1 long. The alarm. They were here. The hall erupted in motion. Warriors grabbed weapons and ran. I stood still for a heartbeat, the sound freezing my blood. Then the bond surged, not with fear, but with a fierce, bright clarion call. Kalen. He was on the wall. He was engaged. "To the inner keep," Rylan said, hand on my arm. "Now." "No." I pulled away gently. "The high gallery, the one overlooking the main gate. I need to see." He wanted to argue, but he saw the resolution in my face, a reflection of his own alphas. He nodded curtly, and we moved not to hide, but to a vantage point. From the high, sheltered gallery, I looked down upon the battle. It was a scene from an old, dark tale. The Winterfang clan were not like our wolves. They were paler, larger, clad in ragged furs and bone armor. They moved with a silent, terrifying ferocity, scaling walls like spiders, meeting our warriors with axes and snarls. And at the center of the storm, on the gatehouse battlement, was Kalen. He was a whirlwind of silver and shadow, his sword a blur. He fought not with brute force alone, but with a commander's mind, directing lines, shoring up weaknesses, his voice a roar that cut through the chaos. But there were so many. A sea of pale fur and flashing steel washed against Greymark's stones. I saw a section of the wall to the east buckle under a concentrated assault. Warriors fell. A breach. My breath caught. The bond screamed with Kalen's desperate shift in focus. He began to fight his way towards the breach, but he was too far. Then, I saw something else. From a postern gate near the breach, a contingent of our warriors surged out, not to meet the wall of enemies head-on. They flowed like water around the edges, led by a familiar, agile form, Rylan, who had left my side without a sound. They harried the flanks of the Winterfang force at the breach, cutting at their sides, disrupting their push. It was a dangerous, desperate tactic, but it worked. It slowed them, confused them just enough for Kalen and his group to reach the spot and seal the gap with sheer, brutal force. The battle raged on, a seesaw of agony. I watched, my soul tied to the gray-clad figure on the walls, feeling every close call, every surge of his effort through the bond. I was not a warrior, but in that moment, I fought with him. I held the line in my heart. As the first hint of dawn tinged the sky, the tide turned. The Winterfang assault, ferocious but ultimately a raiding strike, began to falter against Greymark's stubborn, organized defense. Their leader, a giant of a man with white braids, blew a horn, a retreating, mournful sound. They fell back, melting into the pre-dawn forest, leaving their dead behind. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. Kalen stood on the blood-slick battlement, looking out at the retreating enemy. He was wounded, I could feel it, a deep ache in his shoulder, a slash on his leg. But he stood. His head turned slowly, his gaze lifted from the battlefield, past the smoke, and found me in the high gallery. Across the distance, through the haze of pain and exhaustion, our eyes locked. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply looked at me. And in that look, transmitted down the bond that had held strong through the long, bloody night, was a message clearer than any victory shout. We held. You. Me, the pack, together. The enemy from the north had been repelled, but as I looked at Kalen's weary, triumphant face, a cold trickle of doubt remained. Torn had yielded, the Winterfang were retreating, but the feeling that had started this all, the sense of a hidden knife, a whispering shadow, it wasn't gone. The battle was over. The war for Greymark's soul, it seemed, was just entering a new chapter. Victory tasted of ash and iron. The fortress was saved, but the cost was etched in every wary face, every bandaged limb, every pyre burning too bright against the morning sky. The Winterfang had been driven off, but they had taken a bloody toll, and they had left a poison behind, a whisper of vulnerability. Kalen moved through the aftermath like a ghost himself, a wound on his shoulder stitched, but clearly paining him. He oversaw the defenses, the burials, the care of the wounded, but his eyes, those pale, gray, storm-clad eyes, were distant. He was looking at a horizon I couldn't see. The bond hummed with a new tension. It wasn't the sharp agony of battle, but a deep, persistent ache, a suspicion. 3 days after the attack, he summoned me to the solar. Rylan was there, along with the head healer, Anya. Maps were spread, but Kalen wasn't looking at them. He was holding a broken arrow, its fletching pale and unfamiliar. Winterfang. Their attack was too coordinated, Kalen said, his voice rough with fatigue. They found our weakest wall. They timed it for the moment our best fighters were at the gathering, days away. He tossed the arrow onto the table. Raiders are fierce, but they are not tacticians. Not like this. Ryland's face was grim. You believe they had guidance. I know it. Kalen's gaze shifted to me. Torin yielded, but he lit the fuse before he ever stepped into the circle. He is a snake, but he is not the only one who profits from chaos. A cold dread began to uncoil in my stomach. There's another player. Kalen nodded. Someone with more to gain than a single territory. Someone who whispered to Torin, who maybe even whispered to the Winterfang. Someone who wants Greymark, and perhaps all the packs in disarray. Who? The word was a breath. That, Kalen said, pushing himself up from the table with a wince, is what we must discover, and we must do it before the wound they have opened festers beyond healing. He began to delegate tasks with swift precision. Ryland would interrogate the few Winterfang prisoners, seeking any hint of who they treated with. Scouts were sent to trace back the raiders' trail with new eyes, looking for signs of a rendezvous. But Kalen had a different task for himself, and for me. The records, he said, the oldest ones, the treaties, the trade agreements, the histories of conflicts before my father's time. The enemy is using old hatreds, old alliances. We must understand the board. So we descended into the Undercroft, a place even colder than the lower halls, where the fortress's oldest memories were kept on dusty scrolls and crumbling ledgers. It was a tomb of parchment. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten things. For hours we worked in silence, the only sound the rustle of vellum and our own breathing. Kalen moved stiffly, his injury clearly bothering him, but he didn't stop. He was searching for a pattern, a name, a grievance that stretched back generations. My eyes grew gritty. I was reading a tedious account of a border dispute from 50 years ago when a name leapt out at me. Not from the dispute itself, but from a marginal note written in a different, more elegant hand. Sea alliance with Silverhold, voided after the betrayal of Frostfall. Silverhold, I murmured. Kalen's head came up. What of it? It's mentioned here. An alliance, voided. What is Silverhold? His expression turned grim. It is not a what, it is a who, or was. The Silverhold were a pack to the far southwest, masters of the silver mines, wealthy, ambitious. They were destroyed generations ago in a war my great-grandfather ended. Their alpha was executed for treachery against the allied packs. Their line was thought to be extinct.
To be. The words hung in the cold air. What was the name of their alpha? I asked, my throat tight. Kalen's eyes were like chips of ice. Varen. A memory, sharp and sudden, cut through me. A man, not a warrior. A trader who had come to Greymark occasionally in the past year. Well-spoken, dealing in rare spices and fine metals. He had always been polite, always watching. His name was Lorcan. But he had a ring, a signet ring with a worn crest I'd never quite seen clearly. A feeling, a scent about him, not of pack, but of solitude and hidden ambition. I'd dismissed it as the nature of a lone wolf trader. Lorcan, I breathed. Kalen was instantly alert. You know this name? A traitor. He was here before the attack on me. He left just after the incident with Torin's men. The pieces, jagged and ugly, began to click together. The traitor with access to the halls, the one who could listen, who could move between packs without suspicion, who could carry whispers to Torin and promises to the Winterfang. A phantom with a grudge as old as blood.
Kalen was already moving, calling for Rylan. The hunt had a new scent. But as we emerged from the undercroft, a young page ran up, his face pale. "My king, a rider." "From the South Watch." The man who stumbled into the hall moments later was covered in road dust and dried blood. He held out a sealed message, his hand trembling. "From the Southfold Pack, my lord. They're under attack, not by raiders, by a coordinated force. They fly no banner we know, but they fight like demons. And their leader, he asks for you by name. He calls himself Varen's heir." The unhealing wound had just been torn wide open. The shadow had a name, and it was moving. Kalen took the message, his face a mask of stone. The suspicion was now a declaration of war, not for territory, for vengeance. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the map of the conflict redraw itself. This was no longer about me, or Torin, or even the Winterfang. This was about history, and a debt of blood that had come due. "Rylan," Kalen's voice was calm, deadly. "Muster every warrior who can hold a sword. We ride for Southfold at dawn." Then his gaze returned to me, and the command in it was absolute, but layered with a fear I had never felt from him before. "You will remain. You will fortify Greymark. It is no longer just a fortress. It is the keystone. If this heir seeks to break the allied packs, he will come here last, to shatter the heart. You must hold it." He was leaving. He was riding into the heart of the new storm, and he was leaving me in charge of the home he had just defended with his blood. The weight of it should have crushed me, but the bond, that unbreakable thread, pulled taut. It carried his trust, his fierce belief, and his unspoken plea. Hold. For me. For us. The ghost was gone, the wolf had fangs, and now the heart had a fortress to command. "I will hold it," I said, and my voice did not shake. For the first time since the battle, something like a real though weary smile touched Kalen's lips. "You know." The silence after Kalen left and the warband was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, filled with the echo of hoofbeats and the weight of his final look. Greymark felt cavernous, half empty, but it was not empty of purpose. Rylan had stayed as Kalen commanded. His presence was my anchor. We stood on the gatehouse battlement watching the dust of their departure settle on the road. "He believes you can do this," Rylan said, not as reassurance, but as a fact. "I have to," I replied, the truth of it settling into my bones. I turned from the empty road to face the fortress behind us. It was no longer just a place I served. It was a living thing, wounded and wary, looking to me. We need a census. Every soul, their skills. We need to inventory every grain of wheat, every arrow, every barrel of water. We need eyes on the mountains, not just the forests. If this Varen's heir is clever, he'll come the way we don't expect. Rylan's eyebrow lifted, a flicker of surprise and approval. The old sky passes. They're treacherous, but not impossible for a determined force. Then we watch them, and we use what we have. Not all strength is in a sword arm. We worked. The fortress, still aching from the last battle, rallied not to a warlord, but to a different kind of command. I spoke to the elders, drawing on their long memory of the fortress's secrets. I met with the crafters, the cooks, the farmers' wives. We identified tasks, strengthening inner barricades, preparing sick rooms, creating caches of supplies in hidden places. Children were given jobs, carrying messages, watching the younger ones, keeping spirits up with songs. Everyone had a role. Everyone was part of the wall. I learned names. I listened to fears. I made decisions, small and large, with a calm I borrowed from the steady hum of the bond. Kalen was alive, moving south. I could feel his relentless focus, a beacon of will on the horizon. It gave me strength. But the shadow of the new enemy loomed. Scouts returned with grim news. Southfold was besieged but holding. Kaelin's Fullers had joined with other allied packs, creating a stalemate. But the mysterious heir's tactics were cunning, striking supply lines, using misinformation. It was a war of whispers and knives, as much as swords. Then the first test came, not from an army, but from within. A dispute broke out in the granary. A group of warriors from the western hold, loyal to the exiled Bren, confronted the quartermaster. They demanded a larger share of the remaining ale, muttering about favoritism, about an omega playing to be alpha in the king's absence. Their anger was a spark in a room full of tinder. Rylan moved to intervene, hand on his sword, but I placed a hand on his arm. Let me. I walked into the granary, the tension so thick I could taste it. The ringleader, a hulking warrior named Dax, glared at me. This is no place for you. This is men's business.
I didn't raise my voice. I looked at him, then at the anxious faces of the other workers. Is the business of Greymark not everyone's business? The king fights for Southfold so their granaries aren't burned. He fights so that this one remains full. I gestured to the sacks of grain. That ale you want? It's meant for the watch on the walls tonight, to keep their eyes sharp for the enemy your former captain may have invited to our door. Tell me, Dax, is your thirst more important than their sight? He flushed, his bravado faltering. We've fought for this pack. We deserve... You deserve what every person here deserves, I cut in, my voice hardening. Safety. And safety comes from unity, not from dividing what little we have. The king entrusted me with this fortress. That means I am responsible for every mouth that eats, every back that sleeps under this roof, including yours. So you will take your fair share, and you will do your duty on the wall tonight, sober and sharp. Or you will leave. The choice is yours. Silence. Dax's jaw worked. He looked from my steady gaze to Ryland's cold one, to the disapproving faces of his own comrades. The rebellion died in his eyes, extinguished by simple, unyielding logic. He lowered his head, a fraction. Aye, lady. The crisis passed, but it proved a point. The heart's command was not about fear, but about fierce, unwavering care for the whole. News of the incident spread. Respect, tangible and hard-won, grew. Days turned into a tense, watchful week. Then a breathless scout arrived just before dawn. Movement! In the high eastern crags! A small group, but moving fast. They're not Winterfang. Their gear is different, finer. The heir. He hadn't come with an army. He'd come with a dagger, aiming for the heart while the body was distracted. My blood ran cold, but my mind was clear. Seal the inner keep, Ryland to the walls, signal the lookouts. They are not to reach the outer wall. I remembered the Undercroft, the old builder scrolls. There's a postern gate in the eastern cliff face, ancient, almost forgotten. It leads to the old watchtower. If they know the old ways, that's their way in. We moved. I didn't hide. I went to the inner keep where the most vulnerable were gathered. I looked at their frightened faces, the children, the elders, the wounded from the last battle. They are testing us, I said, my voice carrying in the vaulted hall. They think because the alpha is away, the heart is weak. They are wrong. Every stone of Greymark is defended. Every one of you is protected. You are not a burden. You are the reason we fight. Now, be still and be brave. I stood at the doors, a lone figure in a simple dress, with no weapon but my will. Outside, I could hear distant shouts, the clash of steel. The bond was a wire, singing with distant conflict from the south and the immediate visceral danger here. Then, a new sound, not from the walls, but from within the mountain itself, a grinding of stone on stone, deep and hollow, the old postern gate. They were inside. Rylan and his guards would be on the walls facing the diversion.
The inner keep guards were few. I heard running footsteps in the corridor beyond the great doors. Light, swift, not the tread of our warriors. The doors shook as something heavy slammed against them. Once, twice. The children whimpered. An elder began a low, steady prayer. I faced the door, my heart a drum. This was it. The shadow had come to snuff out the light Kaelin had sworn to protect. The light I now embodied. The doors splintered around the lock and burst open. In the doorway stood not a horde, but a single man. He was tall, elegant even in travel-stained leathers. His hair was pale silver, his eyes a chilling blue. Lorcan, the traitor. In his hand was not a merchant's scale, but a long, thin sword. And on his finger, I could now see it clearly, was a signet ring bearing a mountain peak over a silver vein. Varen's heir. He smiled, a cold, charming curve of his lips. His eyes swept over the cowering people behind me, before settling on my face. The Omega Queen, holding court in the dark. How poetic. His voice was like silk over ice. Step aside. This doesn't have to be messy. I've come for the throne room, for the records of my family's wrongs, not for a room full of cattle. I didn't move. I lifted my chin, meeting those icy blue eyes. You are in the throne room, I said, and my voice was steady, echoing in the silent hall. The throne is not a chair, it is the people, and you will not touch them. His smile faded. He took a step forward. Sentimental nonsense. The strong take, the weak are taken. Your beloved Kaelin understands that, even if he plays a gentler game now. He's not here to protect you. He doesn't need to be, I whispered, and I let the wolf rise. It wasn't a shift. I had no such power. It was the culmination of everything, the fear, the strength, the bond, the command. It was the spirit of the pack flowing through the heart that beat for it. A low, resonant hum seemed to fill the stone around us. Not a growl, but a vibration of pure, defiant will. The air step faltered. His eyes widened a fraction. He felt it, the fortress itself pushing back. Behind me, a low growl started, not from a warrior, from old Hagar, the one-armed blacksmith, then from little Lena, who stepped forward to stand at my side, her small face fierce, then from a wounded warrior struggling to his feet, a wave of sound, of presence, rising from the so-called cattle. We were not an army, we were a pack. And our alpha was not just a man on the battlefield. He was a vow in our blood. And I was his voice. The heir's confidence cracked. He raised his sword, but the gesture seemed suddenly hollow. This changes nothing.
And in the quiet of the solar, with the fortress sleeping securely around us, the ghost and the king were gone. In their place stood two wolves, two halves of a whole, who had faced the howling dark and had finally, together, brought back the light. Peace was not a silent thing. It was the busy, vibrant sound of rebuilding, of laughter returning to the great hall, of the forge hammering out plowshares instead of swords. The shadow of Varen's heir had been swept away, his followers dispersed or reconciled. The allied packs, strengthened by the recent trial, looked to Greymark not with wary obligation, but with newfound respect and genuine alliance. A moon cycle after Kaelin's return, a different kind of gathering was called, not at the stone circle of challenge, but here, in Greymark's great hall. It was a council of peace, of new beginnings. Alphas and their betas from every territory we had fought alongside, and even some we had fought against, arrived under banners of truce. I stood at Kaelin's side on the dais, not behind him. I wore a gown of deep forest green, simple but finely made, a gift from the weavers of the pack. My hair was braided in the Greymark style, interwoven with a slender silver chain, a subtle symbol of my new, formalized standing. It felt strange, but not wrong. The eyes that found me now held curiosity, assessment, and often a surprising amount of gratitude. The hall was full, buzzing with low conversation and the scent of a dozen different packs. Kalen raised a hand, and silence fell. "We are not here to recount battles," he began, his voice warm and firm. "We are here to build what comes after. The recent war showed us two truths: that old hatreds can be weaponized against us all, and that our greatest strength is not in standing alone, but in standing together." He spoke of the new laws of Greymark, the protection of the vulnerable, the emphasis on justice over vengeance, the right of every pack member to safety and respect. He spoke not as an alpha dictating, but as an alpha proposing a new path. Then he did the unexpected. He stepped back half a pace and gestured to me. The heart of this change, the one who held the line when the body was engaged elsewhere, is Alara. She understands the strength of the pack in a way I, as an alpha, was only beginning to grasp. She will speak for Greymark's spirit. A ripple of surprise went through the hall. An Omega addressing a council of alphas? It was unprecedented. My pulse quickened, but the bond thrummed with Kalen's steady confidence. "You are ready." I took the step forward. I looked out at the sea of powerful, often scarred faces. I saw skepticism, curiosity, hope. I stood in this hall not long ago, invisible. I believed safety was in being unseen. I was wrong. Safety is in being seen and being valued. What Alpha Kalen proposes is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength. A wolf who knows its den is safe, its pups are protected, will fight with the ferocity of 10. A pack that cares for all its members is a pack with nothing to fracture it from within. What we faced was not just an enemy with a sword, but an idea, the idea that some are expendable. That idea is a poison, and we have just cut it from our body. I spoke of the children in the inner keep, of old Hagar's growl, of the shared will that had turned back a blade with nothing but unity. You are all alphas, betas, warriors. You know the strength of your arm. I ask you to trust also in the strength of your pack's heart. Forge treaties not just of land, but of principle. Let our new law be that an attack on the most vulnerable in any of our packs is an attack on us all. That is a wall no enemy can scale. When I finished, the silence was profound. Then the alpha of the Southfold pack, a grizzled veteran whose fortress we had helped save, rose slowly to his feet. He placed his fist over his heart and bowed his head to me. A deep, respectful nod. "The heart speaks wisdom," he rumbled. "Southfold stands with Greymark in this." One by one, others followed. Not all immediately, and not without future debate, but the seed was planted. The council shifted from a recounting of war to a planning of peace. Shared patrols, open trade routes, a mutual pledge of protection for all pack members, regardless of rank or designation. Later, as the hall buzzed with discussions over maps and trade goods, a young Omega from the Southfold pack approached me, her eyes wide. She was perhaps 14, delicate and clearly nervous. "Lady Alara," she whispered, "is it true? In your pack, an Omega cannot be taken?" I knelt to her level, as I had with Lena. "It is true. Your safety, your choice, is your own. It is the law." Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of a hope so sharp it was painful to see. I would like to see such a place." "Then you shall," I said, smiling. "You are welcome here, always." As I rose, I felt Kalen's presence beside me. He had watched the exchange. His hand found the small of my back, not possessively, but supportively. A silent, "I am here. I see you." The bond swelled with a shared purpose that was more fulfilling than any victory in battle. "You have given them a new dream to fight for," he said softly, "for my ears only. A dream worth more than territory. We have, I corrected, looking up at him. His gray eyes shone. Yes, we have. The council lasted 3 days. When it ended, there were signed treaties, but more importantly, there were new understandings. The world had not completely changed overnight, but its axis had shifted. Greymark was no longer just a powerful fortress, it was a beacon. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Kalen led me not to the solar, but to the highest battlement, the one that had seen so much blood and fear. The wind was clean and cold, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. I brought you here the night we returned, he said, leaning on the stone parapet. It felt like an ending. Tonight, it feels like a beginning. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the dark, peaceful forest that was his domain, our domain. My father, he began, his voice quieter, was a great warrior. He believed strength was control, dominance. I spent my life trying to be that kind of alpha.
It changes everything, I said, as Rylan and a dozen guards finally crashed into the corridor behind the heir, weapons drawn, having routed his diversion and followed the internal sounds. You came for a fortress of stone. You found a fortress of souls, and we do not yield. The heir was captured, his plot unraveled, but as they took him away, his furious, bewildered eyes remained on me. He had not been defeated by a warrior's blade, but by the very thing he despised, the united heart of the pack. I stood amidst my people, their fear turning to a fierce, triumphant glow. The bond, stretched over the miles, surged with a feeling so intense it was almost a physical touch. Kalen's pride, his awe, his love, crashing over me like a warm, cleansing wave. The heart had held, and in doing so, it had won the war. News traveled faster than writers. The story of what happened in the inner keep, the Omega who stood down the vengeful heir with nothing but her will and the spirit of the pack, spread through the territories like a spring thaw. It was a different kind of legend, not of bloody conquest, but of unbreakable unity. By the time Kalen's warband returned, victorious in the south and having secured the allied packs, Greymark was not just defended, it was transformed. The air was no longer thick with fear, but with a purposeful, proud energy. The walls were manned by alert guards, the halls were orderly, and a sense of shared ownership hummed in every stone. I waited for him in the courtyard, the same place where he had executed my attackers, where he had mustered to leave. I wore no crown, no fine robes, just a simple, clean dress, my back straight. Rylan stood beside me, but the people of the fortress filled the space behind us. Warriors, crafters, elders, children, not as subjects, but as witnesses. The gates opened. Kalen rode in at the head of his warriors. He was weary, dust-stained, bearing a few new scars, but his gray eyes were clear. They scanned the courtyard, taking in the strong defenses, the calm faces, and finally they landed on me. He dismounted, handing his reins to a stable hand without looking away. He walked toward me, the crowd parting in silence for their king. He stopped a few paces away. His gaze moved over my face, as if checking for any new hurt. Then it swept over the people gathered behind me, seeing not a mob, but a cohesive, resilient community. "The fortress stands," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. "The heart stands," I replied softly. It was tested. It held. Something profound and warm broke through the weariness on his face. He took the final step forward, closing the distance between us. He didn't embrace me. He didn't need to. The bond did that for us, singing with reunion, with pride, with a deep, abiding respect that had grown into something unnameable and solid. Instead, he did something that echoed louder than any fanfare. He turned, facing the pack, and placed his hand over his heart. Then he bowed his head, not to me, but to them. "You have honored your alpha," he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have honored your home. You have shown the world that the strength of Greymark does not lie in one man or one sword. It lies in every one of you, in your courage, your unity, your unwavering will to protect each other." He lifted his head, his gaze finding mine again, including me in his address. "The war is over. The traitors are unmasked. The would-be king of shadows is in chains. But the true victory was won here, within these walls, by you." A roar went up then, not of bloodlust, but of pure, exultant joy. It was the sound of a pack that had found its true strength. Later, in the quiet of his solar, with the first stars showing through the high window, we finally had a moment alone. The bond was a quiet, contented hum, a shared fatigue and a shared peace. "Lorcan, the air," I began, "is singing a very detailed song to Rylan," Kalen finished, pouring 2 cups of water. He handed one to me. His grudge was old, his plan clever. He used Torin's ambition and the Winterfang's savagery as his tools. He thought breaking the strongest pack would shatter the alliance, leave the territories ripe for him to reclaim his birthright. Kalen shook his head, a weary disgust on his face. He understood nothing of what true strength is. "And Torin?" I asked. "He's exiled, like his puppets. He will spend his days looking over his shoulder, packless. A fitting end for a wolf who valued only his own hide." Kalen sipped his water, studying me. You commanded them, not with an alpha's voice, but with something else, something I am only beginning to understand." I looked down at the cup in my hands. "I just reminded them what they were fighting for, each other." "That," he said, setting his cup down and stepping closer, "is the most powerful command of all." He stood before me, and the space between us felt charged, not with tension, but with a profound understanding. "I left you to hold a fortress. You built a sanctuary. You didn't just keep them safe, Ella. You made them strong." He reached out. This time his fingers did not hover. They gently brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead, tucking it behind my ear. The touch was fleeting, but it was a seal, a recognition. It spoke of a bond deeper than politics, deeper than protection. It spoke of a partnership forged in the darkest fire and found to be unbreakable. "The law stands," he murmured, his gray eyes soft. "The protection stands, but it is no longer just my law. It is our law. Will you stand with me? Not behind me, not as a symbol in a tower, but here, as the heart to the body, as the voice of the pack to my hand." It was not a proposal of romance in the human sense. It was a wolf's vow, a pledging of lives, of purposes intertwined. It was asking me to be his queen in truth, his equal in spirit, the keeper of the home so he could guard the borders. It was everything I had never dared to dream, and the only thing that now made perfect sense. Tears, bright and happy, pricked my eyes. I didn't hesitate. I placed my hand over his, where it rested against my cheek. The bond bloomed between us, warm and golden and complete. "Yes," I said, "I will stand with you." But it never felt whole. It felt like building a wall with missing stones. He turned to face me. "You were the missing stone, Alara, not because you are an Omega, but because you are you. You showed me that the heart is not a vulnerability to be guarded. It is the foundation that makes the wall unbreakable." He reached into his tunic and drew out a simple object. It was a token, a polished disc of gray stone from the fortress bedrock, etched with the Greymark sigil, a mountain peak under a crescent moon, on a thin, sturdy leather cord. "This is not a crown," he said. "It is a promise. A vow already made by blood and battle, now made in peace." His hands were steady as he lifted the cord. "Will you wear it, as a symbol of your place here? Not as my queen in a palace, but as my partner in this pack, the heart to my hand, for as long as the mountains stand." The simplicity of it, the profound depth of the meaning stole my breath. It was a wolf's pledge, deeper than any human ceremony. It was forever. Tears traced warm paths down my cheeks. I nodded, unable to speak. He gently placed the cord over my head. The stone settled cool and sure against my chest, a tangible weight of belonging, a vow. I reached up, my fingers closing over the stone. Then I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers with his. The bond between us, always present, flared into something serene and eternal, as deep and enduring as the stone beneath our feet. For as long as the mountains stand, I echoed, my voice strong with promise. Below us, the fortress of Greymark slept, secure and hopeful, and on the high battlement, under the watchful moon, the Alpha and his heart stood together, their silent vow echoing into the future, a new legend written not in blood, but in unity and unshakable light. A year turned, marked not by conflict, but by growth. The gray stone token never left my neck. It became known throughout the territories, a symbol of the new way. Stories of the Omega who held Greymark and the Alpha who listened to his heart were told around fires, changing with each telling, but the core truth remained. Strength had been redefined. My days were full, but with a purpose that sang to my soul. I no longer cleaned halls, I helped shape them. I worked with Rylan and the council, a true council now, with voices from every part of the pack, including Omegas and Elders, on matters of justice, resource sharing, and education. We established a proper school in the lower hall, where pups of all designations learned not just fighting stances, but history, healing, and the principles of the new treaties. Kalen was often away, but not at war. He traveled to allied packs, reinforcing bonds, mediating disputes with the authority of one who had earned respect through both blade and principle. The bond stretched, but never strained. It was a comforting constant, a shared heartbeat across the miles. I would feel his satisfaction after a successful treaty, his amusement at some stubborn elder's antics, his quiet longing for home as he turned his horse back towards Greymark. Home. It truly was that now. The greatest test of our new peace came not from without, but from within, as true tests often do. A harsh winter gripped the mountains, deeper and longer than any in memory. Snows sealed the high passes. Game grew scarce. The first whispers of worry began, old fears that in scarcity the strong would take from the weak. Kalen called the pack together in the great hall, now a place of community rather than just feasting. The mood was anxious. The winter is fierce, Kalen acknowledged, his voice calm. It tests us, but it does not divide us. We are one pack. We have prepared for this. The granaries are full because we worked together after the harvest. The stores are secured because we planned together. Then he nodded to me. I stepped forward, holding a large ledger. I've taken a census of every need, I said, my voice carrying. Every family, every hearth. No one will go hungry. No one will go cold. The distributions will be fair, open for all to see. The strong will not take. The strong will ensure. I opened the ledger. If anyone has a concern, a need they have not voiced, you bring it to me or to your section elder. We face this as we face everything now, together. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became a shared burden and not a secret terror. People volunteered for extra woodcutting details. Those with skill in hunting braved the lower valleys to find what game they could, bringing every scrap back to be shared. The healers made rounds to the isolated homes in the lower village. The school children organized to keep the inner halls clear of snow. One particularly bitter day, I was in the stores, overseeing the careful weighing of grain, when old Hagar, the blacksmith, limped in. He carried not a tool, but a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He placed it on the table before me with a grunt. "For you," he said, his voice like grinding stone. I unwrapped it. Inside was a beautifully wrought piece of ironwork, a stylized wolf and mountain, echoing the sigil on my stone token, but fashioned into a delicate brooch. The workmanship was exquisite. "Hagar, it's beautiful, but the metal, your fuel, you shouldn't have—" "Pah!" he interrupted, waving a gnarled hand. "Scraps, and the fuel was mine to spend. You gave my grandson a place in the school. He reads now. Reads! My line." His eyes, usually so fierce, grew suspiciously bright. "You gave this old wolf a future to see. This is thanks. Wear it. Remind them all." I was speechless. I fastened the brooch to my cloak, over my heart. It felt like the highest honor I had ever received. The winter finally broke, yielding to a spring that felt like a miracle. The first green shoots were celebrated like victory banners. On the festival of the first thaw, the entire pack gathered in the sun-drenched courtyard. There was music, simple food shared freely, and the sound of pups playing without a care. Kaylin found me at the edge of the celebration, watching Lena teach a group of younger children a clapping game. He stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. The bond was a contented hum. "You look at them like they are the most precious thing in the world," he observed softly. "They are, simply. They are the future we fought for, the peace we built." He was silent for a moment. "Do you remember what you said to me in my chambers when you were still more ghost than wolf? You asked what you were." I looked up at him. "And you said you were my responsibility." "He was wrong," he said, turning to face me fully. His gray eyes were warm, lit with the spring sun. "You are not my responsibility, Alara. You are my gift, the greatest gift this pack or I have ever been given. You are the song we were always meant to sing." He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. His words, the depth of feeling in the bond, the shared life thriving around us, it was a union more complete than any physical gesture could convey. He offered his arm. I took it, my fingers resting on the familiar strength of his forearm. Together we walked into the heart of the celebration. Warriors nodded respectfully, elders smiled, Omegas met my gaze with open, happy faces. Children ran past laughing. We were not just an alpha and his chosen. We were the living proof of a promise kept. The ghost was a cherished memory. The king was a steadfast guardian. And together we were the heart of a pack that had learned to sing a new, joyous, and unbreakable song. A song of unity, of protection, and of a love as deep and enduring as the ancient stones of home. As the sun set, painting the mountains in gold and rose, the first howl rose, not of alarm, but of pure communal joy. One by one, others joined, a symphony of voices under the twilight sky. Kaylin tilted his head back and added his own deep, resonant howl to the chorus. I felt it vibrate in my own chest, through the bond, through the token at my throat. I did not howl, but I smiled. My heart so full it felt ready to burst into light. I had come home. We all had. And the song of our pack, finally whole, would echo through these mountains for generations to come. The end.